Coming up, we're going to head back to the universe of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to another Initial to Modeler. So another little project I wanted to work on here to try to get it together for Wonderfest is this one that we're going to go over, and it involves using this little model kit that I found at last year's Wonderfest of the SSN Seaview. This is about half the scale or half the size of the 1/350 scale. Remember now, the Seaview has been released in two versions. We've got the 1/350 scale, which is the version we're all accustomed to seeing. It's been in that size for many years, and then of course Mobius Models a number of years back released the big 1/128 scale version of the ship, which is a beautiful model to work with, and it came in two versions, the movie version and the one seen on the TV screen. So I was looking at this kit here, this little model, and I was thinking how cool it would be to create a display in which the Seaview is seen cruising along the surface of the ocean. And I was actually tempted a while back to try this with the 1/350 scale. However, the display base would be fairly large, so I thought this would be an ideal way to try to create something like that. Now, it just so happened the last time I tried a simulated water effect like this, it was with another model from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and that is the 1/128 scale version of the flying sub. Let's take a look. So this display shows the flying sub emerging from the water, and I tried to replicate the way it was seen on the TV show. The water effect was created by first spraying on various layers of blue onto a flat surface before applying a clear resin sealant. This particular type of material required the use of a caulking gun. And as you can see, I also lit up the model with small SMDs. A link to this project is listed below if you're interested in how all this came together. Well, one thing I am not going to do is I'm not going to repeat what I did with the flying sub. That material is too difficult to work with, and just the thought of putting the submarine into that material and trying to shape it to make it look like water, yeah, that's going to be too hard to do. Actually, I'm going to be following along a tutorial that I happened to come across on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel called Ebroin's Miniatures. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And this gentleman builds World War II ships, and he's done a few ocean dioramas, and the way that he creates the ocean is by using a material called Magic Sculpt, which is a two-part material very similar to epoxy sculpt. He will sculpt out the ocean, and then on top of that he will glue on these antiseptic wipes with a gel medium, and once that's dry he paints it, and then he adds the sea foam and those types of details using cotton. Now the material I'm going to be using instead of the Magic Sculpt is actually this air dry clay. It's very inexpensive and it should work well as a substitute for the Magic Sculpt, but then for the rest of it I'll follow along with using the antiseptic wipes and the rest of it. So this video is going to be really about creating that display base, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the model. I will spend a few minutes to show you the model itself. There's really not a lot to it. I'll quickly put it together and paint it, and then we'll jump right into making the display. And by the way, I've already experimented with the air dry clay and to see how it adheres or attaches to Foamular, which is the material I'm going to be using for the display base, and it worked quite well. Alright, so I'm ready to get started with this. Let's go ahead and begin. Alright, so this is a closer look of the model. You can see it is the version from the TV show. If you recall, the one from the movie had 8 windows, I believe, and this has the big 4 windows along with the I believe these are sonar domes here on the side, and then we've got a conning tower that is just simply placed right here. And the tower has no periscopes or any posts that are there, so I'm going to add that using some styrene rods. And then you can see it measures about 8 inches in length. This is about 57% the size of the 350 scale, which measures 13 inches. Now the one thing that is lacking are those vents here along the side, of course, to the ballast tanks. And so what I decided to do to remedy that situation is to get a hold of a decal sheet. Now this is a decal sheet that's produced by TSDS models, and it's for the 1/350 scale, and so it comes with those vents that you can add onto the model, and that model kit comes with those vents. You would actually put these inside those little vents, but what I decided to do is to scan this and create a decal sheet that is the appropriate size for this here. So I did the measurements and came up with this decal sheet here, and basically just scanned the vents here and sized them down appropriately. and I printed a number of them just to have some extras here. And you can see they'll fit right along. I've already sized this. It's going to fit right along the areas that they need to go. So for this is printed now on inkjet decal paper, and it was coated 4 times with this crystal clear acrylic coat, gloss coat from Krylon. And in the past I've had some hit and miss success with decals, and the reason is because I was using an enamel clear coat rather than that one, and this one works perfectly. So we're not going to have any problems with the ink not staying on the decals this time around. Alright, so let me go ahead and get this primed up and paint it, and I'll apply the decals, and I'll show you that in just a second. Alright, well this is now the completed sub, and I began by adding some rods along the top of the conning tower. I simply used a pin vise to drill some shallow holes to accommodate the styrene rods. And for the radio antenna, I just attached a small piece of strip styrene. There were a number of defects along the hull surface, as is common with many resin kits, and these had to be covered before applying the primer and base color. For the color, I chose a similar shade of blue-gray that I used for my 1/128 scale model, and I added a darker tone along the waterline to simulate the area being wet from the ocean. And lastly, I added the decals, which I made, and they worked out great to not only add the vents for the ballast tanks, which I thought would be the only thing I'd be using from the sheet. I also ended up using the decals that were provided for the escape and missile hatches, along with the access hatches on the conning tower. Alright, so we're ready to begin here. I have a piece of Foamular that I've cut to 4 by 12 inches, and I will be positioning the submarine just a little forward, giving us room to provide a nice wake along the aft section, and we should have ample room to create some waves along the sides of the hull and nose section. Alright, so the first step is to start by sculpting out the water with the clay. Let's begin. Okay, well as you can see I have these reference pictures that I printed out, and I initially did so to help me recreate the wake that the Seaview makes while it's on the surface. But you know what, I also found them helpful with carving out the area that the ship will be sitting in. And as you can see when you look at these pictures, the unique design of the head causes the water to dip down here along the side and then back up again. And so when carving this out, I use my X-Acto knife to shape the area around the forward section accordingly. So hopefully that'll help with sculpting the clay around this area. Alright, well the first step now will be to work on those waves around the submarine first before getting to some of the other areas further out. Alright, just midway through here now, and I think I'm going to give this some time to dry. The submarine's not glued into place, but once this is dry, I will definitely do that. I will continue on with adding more detail here along the water line. The water has to come over these fins back here, and certainly we're going to fill in this area over in this section. Alright, so this is how it's looking, and as you can tell around the front section here, it's gray. In this video you can see I'm using epoxy sculpt instead, and that's the reason why. I started out with the clay and it wasn't quite looking right, and I figured I'd have a little more control with the epoxy sculpt. And again, using our reference pictures here as a guide, I was able to have a little more control of how it was turning out. So I think that was a good decision. Alright, so the next step before painting is actually to use these wet wipes. We're going to apply them onto the surface and adhere them using this gel medium. And this is going to even out the look of the water, still give it some texture, but be able to eliminate some of the layered look here that you see after having applied all these different layers of clay. Alright, well, 3 coats of the diluted gel medium was applied, and I can see how it really does a nice job tying everything together. When I saw that the clay was looking kind of rough with texture, you can see how the application of the wipes and holding it in place with the liquid gel did a really fine job with smoothing things out, making things more uniform, and giving us some surface texture there as well. Alright, so what we're going to do next now is start the painting process. One thing that was suggested in the video that I'm telling you guys about was to use this stuff here to help mask the edges of the ship here. And so I went ahead and got some, and I think this might work better than tape, at least for around this waterline here, since the area around it is so irregular. So I'll go ahead and apply that and get you caught up here in a second. Alright, well, everything's taped up and ready to go here, and the poster putty worked well. I only took one strip to stretch out and apply along the base of our model here. And then I just took paper to cover the rest of it. So we're going to start by applying some primer, and we'll move on to some colors. So as you can see, I've applied a blue now over the black, and what I'm using here is this Insignia blue from Testors. I still have some Testors colors in my collection. I was originally going to use Prussian blue, but I thought this one, after comparing the shades, looks a little brighter and more appropriate. So what we're going to do next now is to apply some lighter shades of blue, the first of which is going to be this one here. It's a blue Peacock that I'll thin down for the airbrush. We're going to be applying it in this direction here, so on this side of the waves. And then that's going to be followed by a lighter shade of blue that's going to enhance the areas where bubbles would form. So again, using our pictures here as a guide as to where those bubbles would be, and we'll get into making those here shortly as well. But let's go ahead and first apply this color. Okay, well, this is how it's looking, and so far I am pleased with how this is turning out. I was a little skeptical at the beginning when all it was were the wet wipes that were glued onto the surface. Just looking at the texture, I mean, it looked okay, so I had a feeling it would turn out all right. It just wasn't quite sure, but gosh, it sure really looks good when all the colors have been applied. And the last thing I did after applying that light blue color to the tips of the waves there is I applied 3 coats of Krylon acrylic clear. So what we need to do now to finish up is to apply some cotton all along these waves here so that we can replicate the look of the foam that you see around the submarine as it's cruising. And gosh, I sure have to give a lot of credit to the people who did the special effects for Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, because it sure looks realistic. I mean, I know this is just a even though it's a large model, it was still in a water tank of some sort, and how they got, you know, all the foam around here is beyond me. I'm not sure how they did that, but it looks so realistic, and so that's what we're going to try and replicate here. So the idea is to use cotton for this step, and I'm going to be applying the cotton or gluing it onto the surface with just a watered down white glue, and following that application we're going to put on some watered down white paint. And the reason for that is because if you allow the cotton to just dry with the glue, it's going to look more transparent. So we want to retain that whiteness, and that's what the white paint is going to allow us to do there. So let's go ahead and get started. We are now in the final stretch, and I think this will all come together now as we apply this last step. So the adhesive used here is simply diluted white glue. The wisp of cotton is then placed onto the surface, and the process now begins with creating realistic looking waves. The next step is to take 2 toothpicks to separate the fibers for forming the thin strands of foam that you see in between each wave. I didn't find this easy at first, as I had trouble getting the strands to stay where I wanted them to, but eventually I got the hang of it. While doing this, I found the reference photos very useful. Looking back at them constantly helped me make sure I was positioning and spacing out all of the fibers appropriately in order to make this look convincing. And here I'm using diluted white paint that is being applied while the glue is still wet, which helps to retain a nice white color. Alright, well I'm going to go ahead and finish this up here now, just adding a few more details here. And I think you guys get the idea of how to apply this. So I will finish up and show you the completed project in just a second. Okay, well here we now have the completed project, and overall I'm happy with how it all turned out. This 8-inch Seaview was again a model that I found at Wonderfest in 2021, and it provided a great opportunity to create an Ocean Diorama / display base, which is something I've been wanting to revisit. The method I followed here is something I came across on a YouTube channel called Ebroin's Miniatures, and I will provide a link to a couple of his videos down below. The technique involves sculpting the surface with Magic Sculpt, but in this case I used a lightweight clay instead. The surface is then covered with wet wipes, painted, and this is followed by the application of cotton to create the seafoam and wake. Overall, I think this is a very easy and straightforward way of creating a simulated ocean surface without having to use liquid resins. I think the one advantage you may have with using a two-part sculpting material is that you probably would end up with a smoother sculpt in the end. When the clay was dry, I thought it ended up looking rough, and you could easily see the layering, but I chose the lightweight clay because it was cheaper and easier to get a hold of. The application of wet wipes, however, helps to greatly even out the surface and provide a nice realistic texture. Now I have to add here that halfway through the process of applying the cotton, I started to worry that this was not turning out well. The cotton just wasn't looking very realistic. I did keep at it though and added in the use of the gel medium as a way of adhering the cotton to the waves. And once it was completed, I also sprayed on applications of gloss coat, which I think in the end helped to bring everything together. So my goal was to create a display of the Seaview on the ocean, and if you compare it to one of the reference photos, I think I accomplished that. Well, just some closing comments here. You know, midway through, as I was starting to question whether or not this was going to turn out, I did go on YouTube to try to look at least try to find some other alternatives to creating an ocean diorama, and certainly there are a variety of ways to do this. I've posted a couple other links down below you might find interesting. These two other techniques are somewhat similar in terms of the methodology of sculpting out your body of water, body of the ocean there, and then covering it with some material. One guy used tin foil, another person used watercolor paper, you know, to even out the texture before applying the paints and the detailing. So check them out. I think you'll find those interesting. You might want to try one of those alternatives instead. You know, my issue again with the cotton was it just wasn't looking as realistic as I wanted it to, and it started to make me think of how the simulated explosions had turned out with cotton, and that was one of the reasons why I searched for an alternative with the Tide Bomber. If you recall, I ended up using expandable foam for that. So again, maybe it's just something I was doing that didn't quite look right. You know, this is my first time ever trying this technique. Not being critical of Ebroin Miniatures techniques, because if you go to his channel, you'll be amazed at how those dioramas look, so check them out. But it's just something to give some thought to if you're going to try this out. Explore a little bit about some other techniques as well. You might find one of those might suit you a little bit better. The one thing I did want to also add is that the acrylic coating that I applied afterwards not only made, in my opinion, the seafoam look a little better, but it also helped address one other issue, and that was the you know, the diluted glue that you're using to glue down the cotton with, you know, is watery, so it's going to kind of run, and when it dries, it's going to dry kind of hazy, so it takes away from the glossiness of the water, and also starts to obscure some of the colors too. So I think that it's critical to go ahead and apply more acrylic coating there, the gloss coating, just to help bring back the vibrancy of the colors as well as the shininess of the water as well. Okay, so if you have any questions about this project, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com. I think in the end I ended up with a nice replica of the Seaview on the water, which is something I've always wanted to have in my collection. So I think overall it really turned out well, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'll be bringing it to Wonderfest, and what's left on the channel, at least coming up for the channel now, is going to be hopefully another hot off the bench I can try and get together before I leave for Wonderfest. You know, between work and all the other things I'm doing, it's just times at a premium here. But I'll try and get that on the channel, and then when I get back from Wonderfest, I'm going to put everything together into a hot off the bench segment that has all to do with Wonderfest, and then we'll move on to the Grissom. All right, thanks again for watching, guys. I always appreciate all the kind comments, and feel free to let me know, again, if you have any questions about this particular project. All right, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.